So when we first come to practice, in the beginning years of practice, certainly, what we're often coming for is that we want a sense of relaxation. Where we're feeling some tension, some stress in our lives. We come to practice, to meditation, for a sense of relaxation. Very normal, very understandable. We want less anxiety in our lives. We want to maybe resolve some issues that we're aware of, that we feel difficult. So all this is very normal, very understandable, and very necessary. But as we continue to practice, something becomes clear. You can come in, it's fine. Something becomes clear, that this stress that we feel, this anxiety, this any problem, any suffering, is wrapped up with the sense of self. That slowly, usually, begins to become clear. So that it's wrapped up with the self-sense, and we begin to realize it's necessary to inquire into this self-sense that's at the center of suffering, to inquire into it and to address it, and that's really fundamental to the path. Because our normal state of consciousness is actually very self-centered. So sometimes it's quite extreme, and you see the extremes of sort of egomania. But often it's just sort of quietly running through and running our lives. It's just we look at the world, we look at our experience, we relate to others through a self-centeredness. There's no judgment in that. It's just part of the normal human condition. There might come a point, though, in practice, or there might come a point in one's unfoldment when one really asks a question that might shake things up a little bit. And someone might ask, what would it be to live a life where the self is actually not at the center of the stage? A life without self at the center of the drama. And something in the being is beginning to unfold, awaken in some way, and that question might come up, even though we don't actually know what that would even mean, or can't even imagine. What would it be to live a life that's not centered around me, that I'm not looking out from a center of accumulation, from a center of interest? And then we also, if you've been around these circles, you also hear the Buddhist teaching of no self, or selflessness, or not self, and you sort of scratch your head and wonder what all that's about. And it is a very confusing, or can be very confusing teaching. But there's the message there that actually this sense of self that we have, that we take to be so real, may not be as true, as real as we think it is. And another kind of question inside, do I want to live in an illusion? Is it okay for me to go through my life from birth, however long it lasts, to death, and have this nagging suspicion that it was all centered around this self, which may not even actually be real in the way that I thought it was? Would that be okay? To live an illusion that way, which is the common human condition, but would it be okay? So when the Buddha originally, the sort of original first, what's called the first turning of the wheel, his first teaching, he actually steered quite clear of making a lot of philosophical statements. It's like this, or it's like that, or this is how life is, guys, and or the self is like this or like that. He wasn't really much inclined to do that, or inclined to make intellectual statements. So he veered away from that, and particularly around the nature of the self. And so there's a story that one day he was sitting around, and this sort of wandering ascetic came up to him and started arguing with him and trying to make him admit that there's no self, right? There's no self. And the Buddha actually just sat silent and did not respond to him. So the guy asked a second time and a third time, and in the end got frustrated and just left, sort of, you know. Buddhas, what are you going to do? And then 5 minutes later, another wandering ascetic comes and said, there is a self, right? There is a self. And similarly, Buddha didn't say anything. And second time, Buddha didn't say anything. Third time, silence. And this guy goes. And Ananda, the Buddha's cousin and attendant, is standing there and said, you know, what's up? What's up, boss? You're just not talkative today, or? And the Buddha said, if I had agreed with the first person, it would be a belief in nihilism, in the non-existence of the self. If I had agreed with the second person, it would be reifying the self, making it into something real. And he said the truth is actually neither of those. But he avoided making those kind of statements. The other thing that doesn't exist in the teachings of the Buddha is this goal or emphasis to try and sort of eradicate the self, to dissolve it or explode it or merge it into something. Okay, so some religious traditions that is the movement. In Buddhist teaching, it's actually not that. There's something different going on. And there's a different understanding. So we're not trying to get rid of the self. That's not the purpose here. That's not the goal. What then is the goal? Actually, to try and understand something about the self. To understand something about the self that frees our relationship with life. Frees our relationship with things. In a way that the sense of self is not felt as a burden, is not felt as a prison. It's the understanding that frees. So, understanding and also understanding how to live in a way that the self is not a burden. So how does this happen? How does this move towards in the path? So one of the ways is actually by cultivating loving kindness, by cultivating compassion, by cultivating a heart of love that the interest is flowing out and not always just inside. Now of course we need to take care of our self-loves, I think I touched on yesterday. But this cultivating of kindness in the heart actually begins to unburden the life from the self. And similarly, actually, the cultivation of other things, calmness, equanimity, all these lists that very dry if you've read them, these Buddhist lists. All this is actually helping to unburden the life from the self. So there's the cultivation of the beautiful qualities of heart. There's also acting in the world in ways that diminish the constriction, the stranglehold of self. So, two things I'd like to generosity and service. Actually, actually go into that in a little bit. So there's cultivating the beautiful qualities. There's acting in ways that unburden, that lead to less of a burden of self. And there's the inward looking, practicing ways of seeing that are not in terms of self. So Buddha's encouraging us to look a certain way at experience. I'll go into this later on. Since we tend to look at things as me or mine, you or yours, we tend to look at the world in terms of self. And the Buddha's saying, rather than making statements about reality, can we actually practice a way of changing that way of looking? So, as teachers and in the Dharma, we talk a lot about mindfulness. I don't know how many times, just on this retreat, we've sort of emphasized it. And as someone was saying today, well, you can't have too much mindfulness. And that's true, you can't have too much mindfulness. But it's not the whole deal, it's not the whole path. Mindfulness has to be balanced with other qualities. So these other beautiful qualities of heart, and these other actions, these other ways of being and relating in the world. So in a way, we look in practice, but we also look out and act outwards, and that's also important. So when we're here, it could be here in situations like this, my practice, my mindfulness, that's what matters. Maybe the sense of connection with the people practicing together, maybe that matters as much. Maybe it's not just about my practice. Maybe viewing it in terms of my practice doesn't bear the best kind of fruit. So when we're here, are we also open to everyone around us? Do we have a sense that we're making this journey together? We're all making this journey together. Very different from just coming in here, me, my mindfulness, my concentration, etc. And similarly, with the ways we, as I went into today in the question answer period, the way we're looking at the work when we're working could be we're viewing it as just an exercise in mindfulness, which is fine. How mindful can I be of the sensations as I'm digging, as I'm painting or whatever? Fine. But maybe a bit bigger. How mindful can I be of all my patterns that are involved? The fear, the anxiety, the pressure that's felt, boredom. Bigger mindfulness. Or even bigger, can I relate to it as service? When mindfulness becomes less important at that point. I'm just here doing service. One of the ways I mentioned was this generosity. So in Pali, in the language of the Buddha, the word is dana, D-A-N-A. And this is really a practice. So what we notice is when we practice generosity, really take it on as a practice. The movement of generosity, of giving, is something that leads to a sense of lightness in the being. And we can really, all this is to be checked out. When we give, it brings a sense of lightness. Sometimes there's a sense of fear with it, but if we check it out, there's a sense of lightness that goes with it. An openness goes with it, an openness of the mind and heart. You can see generosity is a movement of openness, open, and it goes out. The Buddha said, if you knew, as I do, the power of generosity, if you knew what I knew about the power of generosity, you wouldn't let a single meal go by without giving something to someone. So obviously this guy knows something. And it's a powerful statement. And it's interesting, when we explore this quality, this practice of generosity, interesting, we can give money, of course, we can give of what we have. And some people, that's a very natural way to give them. That's where they gravitate to. And some people, in a way, you can give money or time. And it's interesting just to note where one's balance is, where one moves towards. So for me, I notice that when I have money, relatively it's easier to give, but time is often something quite precious. Like I'm a bit more hoarding of my time. So just to see, where's one, to explore this, where's my balance? Am I free with time, but am I a bit hoarding of money? Just to investigate the whole area of generosity. And of course we can give kindness, we give kindness. We give attention as an act of kindness. All this in the realm of generosity. And if we explore it, it's a curious thing. I mean, I find, and I think anyone who would really explore it deeply would find that there's a paradox here. If I give, I somehow paradoxically feel like I have enough, though I'm giving away. And if I habitually don't give, if I'm concerned with saving, somehow what gets saved, as well as the material stuff, is this gnawing, little gnawing fear or worry that there won't be enough, that it won't be okay. So our actions have what we call karmic imprints, karmic consequences. So there's a paradox. When I give, I actually feel there's enough. When I hold on, I feel like there's not enough. The Buddha made another very radical statement. It might not be that easy to understand at first, but he said, what we give away is ours. What we keep at home is not ours. What we give away is of value. What we keep at home is of no value. What we give away, we don't need to protect. What we keep at home, we need to protect. What we give away causes us worry. What we keep at home causes no worries. No. What we give away causes no worry. What we keep at home causes worry. So, what we give away gives inexhaustible wealth. What we keep at home will be exhausted. What we keep at home leads to negativity. What we give away leads directly to enlightenment. It's the same, completely turning everything on its head. What's he talking about? When we give away, we don't have to worry about that thing anymore, but we're investing in the beauty of that quality, of the openness, of the lightness, of the generosity, of the non-self-preoccupation. When we keep, when we hoard, when we don't give, all the problems that come in trying to protect that, and that encrusting of the me mind. So obviously we live lives that we have families, we have people who are close to us, we have friends that are close to us, and it would be ridiculous to say that we don't have a responsibility to those that are near and dear to us. Of course we do. But the movement of the Dharma, the spiritual movement, can that be expanded? Are we interested in expanding that giving? So I remember years ago when I lived in the States, and I would really love to give money to certain environmental organizations that would buy these, you've probably heard of these programs, they buy areas of rainforest or some endangered land. And it would often be, in the middle of some country, on the other side of the world. And I would know that first of all, that it was anonymous. No one would ever know that I gave it. And second of all, that I would never see that piece of land. I would never see those trees. I would never see the beauty there. And why there was something about doing that, knowing that I would never enjoy it in that sort of direct way, I would never get any payback from it. Something about it that expanded the constricted sense of self. It was almost as if the sense of self expanded to include that rainforest, instead of just me, mine, stopping right here. In a little while, it was, I can't remember, 6 months ago, a group of Dharma people, Dharma friends, and I went up to the Highlands of Scotland, and we had a 1 week work retreat there, planting trees, reforesting. The whole of Scotland apparently was one huge forest. It's now completely devastated. We were working on reforesting and talking to some of the people involved. It's actually a 300-year project. So the saplings that we were planting, we would have we wouldn't even know whether they survived or not. And again, it was completely anonymous. It's this sense of giving to something that I can't immediately relate my sense of self to. And there's something that does indirectly to the very sense of self. So there's generosity and there's service, of course, and we're all, just by virtue of being here on work retreat, you're involved in service. And again, sometimes with practice, the attitude is my practice, my mindfulness. How's my mind doing? If we're involved in service work, from the perspective of service, how I feel, how clear my mind is actually completely secondary. How I feel is not important, and that not being important does something to the sense of self. It loosens the sense of self. And there's giving through service, and there's the non-preoccupation with how my mindfulness is doing, my quality of mind, etc. So a couple of people have touched in interviews on actually what is right livelihood, and what would it be to move maybe for a period into a life of service, or exploring that option. And that is often a movement out of the mainstream. So the mainstream culture is about me, my, getting, and everything's set up that way. But to say I'll have less for a while and I'll just explore this, it doesn't fit in. And there may be the voices of fear with that. And there may be the voices of fear from family and friends, etc. But what are we investing in? So sometimes we practice generosity and service, and actually coming, there's a bit of motivation of fear involved in it. There's a bit of fear what people will think of us. I hope they think I'm kind, or we don't want to upset people, or we want them to praise us or approve of us. Or we feel unworthy, and just our existence is unworthy, and that we have to give to feel a sense of worthiness. And so just to notice when that kind of level of fear creeps in. And it's okay, it doesn't mean not to give, but the motivations can purify over time. So, actually, the movement in practice is not from self-centeredness to other-centeredness. It's not actually doing that. So if other-centeredness is also a bit off balance, and often if we're completely other-centered, it is often driven by some level of fear or something like that. It's rather a movement from self-centeredness to, I don't know what you would say, openness, or awareness of interconnection, or even interpenetration, awareness of our interpenetration. It's the movement from the prison of self to openness. Can we even just hearing that, can we actually get a sense, just maybe even a dim sense, of the freedom, the possibility of freedom there? So how are we looking at our lives? Another thing I used to quite enjoy doing when I can just take something that we usually relate to as me or as mine. So sitting in your house or your apartment, you just sit on the sofa, no big meditation deal or anything, and just sit there, quiet, and just look at your possessions, and just sit and look. And if you just stay steady with that, without any pressure, what can happen is they begin to look. The sense of mind just goes. They begin to look like they're not mine. It's just stuff. You can look at your sofa, your table, your TV, your record collection, your house. You can even just stare at your hand for long enough, and it begins to get a sense of, actually, it's not really mine. It just comes through the presence of awareness there. You can even look at your lover like that, look at your child like that. It doesn't mean taking away the care at all, but just have a sense, yes, at one level things are mine, at another level they're not mine. It's just this veil we put over our lives, seeing through me and mine. And if you do that, if you do experiment and just look at something, to feel the freedom there. I mean, why I used to enjoy doing it was I began to feel like, what a relief. All this stuff, it's not mine. I don't have to be so bothered with it. I don't feel so encumbered by it. But that feeling of the freedom and appreciating the freedom and the relief, that's an important part of letting this understanding, allowing the understanding to go deep. Because typically, if we're addicted to looking at things in terms of me and mine and self, and to even suggest letting go of that would be like, begin to see, actually this is quite nice. It's lovely to unburden oneself that way. And that doesn't mean absolving myself of responsibility. To feel the freedom of not fully believing in I have or mine. So with self, with this prison of self, what's often really felt painfully is the kind of self-views with which we imprison ourselves. So we crystallize, we solidify certain self-views about ourselves, and sometimes they run right through our life. And for many people, it goes from some time in their childhood, maybe even before, right through until the day they die. And these self-views that have become like a cage are not broken through, are not challenged, and the whole life is imprisoned that way. Can we see differently? Can we look at situations differently that really begins to challenge those kind of self-views? I remember years ago working with a therapist, and she was one of these very sort of, I think she had a black belt in I don't know what, very sort of directing, quite aggressive, and I was very young at the time, so all this aggression about getting to the bottom of my problems was quite scary actually, and she would actually crystallize, and together we would crystallize self-views about me. This is me, and this is my problem. It's because such and such happened in the past. And all this pain around self-view and the need to break out of how I thought I was. And not seeing that it all arose out of conditions, including how I was in that interaction. That there was so much pressure coming, and so much leading so much fear, that it actually led to me feeling a certain way, me perceiving a certain way, me acting a certain way. And then that was taken as a view of who I am, completely not considering, completely oblivious of all the conditions, present and past, that lead to a behavior or lead to a pattern of thinking. So we tend to view in terms of self, in terms of personality, and not in terms of, let me look a little wider. What are the conditions that are giving rise to this behavior? One way of looking is misery. Just misery, there's no other word for it. And another way of looking brings space, brings freedom, brings lightness. Similarly with our mind state, depressed mind state, and not understanding, for example, not understanding where that's coming from. So sometimes just the fact of physical energy has an effect on for instance, if we're tired physically, or if we just got out of bed, mornings or whatever, there's a low physical energy, and the mind follows, mirrors, is not supported enough by the physical energy, and so it sinks. And instead of just seeing the relationship of mind and mind state with, for instance, physical energy, time of day, etc., we make a conclusion: I am depressed, I am a failure at life, or whatever it is. Not just, can we look a bit bigger and see the connections? Say, I am an angry person, I am a depressed person, I am this, I am that. This is my problem. Me, my. It's so tight and so wrapped. Can we really look into what the Buddha called dependent arising? The way things are, the way things manifest, arises dependent on many conditions. And similarly, and a couple of people have touched on this, it's almost like the self gets into this way of believing that everything is dependent on it. Everything is dependent on me. And someone was saying they realized they were doing a job around the house that was actually a job that would probably go on for months, if not years. And they were just one little piece of this. It all didn't depend on them, and that sense began to unburden the pressure of the situation. It was felt as a pressure. It's okay. It doesn't all depend on self. Or similarly, sitting here, if I relate to the Dharma talk, like, well, boy, now I have to really entertain these people for an hour or something. That would be complete misery. It doesn't. We tend to view things in terms of self, an exaggerated place of self, and it's completely lopsided. So there's looking out at how we're living, how we're being with other people, and looking out at our life. And there's looking in terms of self. If we look if in meditation and in practice over time, we look inside, we can ask, actually, where is this self? Where is it? Because when we look, if we're just completely honest, just completely with what's going on, what do we find? There's body and body sensations. There's feelings and emotions and mind states and thoughts. There's nothing that doesn't change. The sense of self is something that doesn't change. It's just, I'm me, I was me yesterday, I will be me tomorrow. But when we look inside, there's actually nothing we find that doesn't change. There's nothing we can find that we can point to and say, that's the self. Even the body, if I had an accident, had to amputate my leg at the knee, or up here, I would still feel, well, that's me, and after a while I would have forgotten about what happened to the leg. So how much am I going to chop off before I still say me, There's nothing we can find, there's nothing we can point to and say that's the self. We can't find it. And yet, we spend our whole lives, or most of our lives, running around at the whim of this self, expending huge amounts of energy and resources and doing what it says, and yet where is it? What is it? So to see this for ourselves in practice actually is unfindable. That's one approach, to see that we can't find it anywhere inside. No matter how long we look, no matter where we look, you won't find it. No one has ever found it. That's one approach. The other approach is actually to realize that we actually don't need to see anything as self. I don't need to see my body as self. I don't need to see my thoughts as self. I don't need to see my emotions as self. I can sit here in meditation or in my life and actually regard everything as not me, not mine. And still function, still talk, still interact, still love, still go to the toilet, whatever. To add me, mine is actually it's an E number. It's an added extra. We actually can let go of that, and the world goes on, life goes on, experience unfolds. We don't need to. It's something extra and in a way false. That actually includes awareness. So sometimes when one practices in this way, one may have heard spiritual teachings saying, you're not the body, you're not your thoughts, you're not the da-da-da. And what's left is a sense of, I'm awareness, I am the witness, I am, with capital letters. Or you may hear teachings saying, you are awareness, your true nature is awareness. And Buddha Dharma doesn't actually stop there. It goes deeper and says, you don't even need to identify with awareness. There's nothing anywhere that needs to be identified with. And actually the Buddha says, nothing at all should be identified with as me or mine. Nothing at all. Including even what might be the most subtle aspect of our existence, our awareness. Just completely radical, not holding on to anything. Nothing left for self to grab onto, to build on. Can we bring this into our practice, into our life? Can we begin to see our experience as not self? So the breath comes in and it goes out, and it comes in and it goes out. And it's just nature happening. It's the wind element, the air element coming in and coming out. It's not, if you just really with it and really just watch it, it's not me breathing, it's just breathing happening. Or the body sensations. Just be with your body sensations, just keep watching them. Can you see? It's just happening. It's not me, not mine. Make that something that becomes a familiar way of looking. We're so used to seeing in terms of me and mine. Can we actually make not me, not mine, as familiar? So it's a practice. And similarly with our thinking, we're so identified with our thinking and the problems that causes. We're tyrannized by our thinking because of our identification with it. So judgments, can we actually view that as not me, not mine? It's just that there's a radio on in the background, and it's a very poor station. It's just saying all this stuff. Can we begin to see it as not me, not mine? It's really a practice, but very possible. And if we begin to see through this self-identification, sometimes you see through it suddenly, sometimes gradually, and then this whole structure of self-judgment, which most of humanity is prey to, can actually be gone, and really, really gone, and I mean it, gone. Now, that can happen suddenly, like a huge chunk of this structure of self-judgment just crumbles. Or it can happen gradually, but it can go, absolutely possible for everyone that it goes. And that doesn't mean that it's replaced by aren't I fantastic, by an inflation of self. Actually what happens is we lose the whole seduction of flipping between those two poles. I'm worthless, I'm fantastic. The whole seduction of thinking and viewing life in terms of self and self self-view, self-measurement, self-anything. It just, we lost interest in that. It may seem like one could feel like, how on earth would that ever happen? You don't know what's going on here. But it's very possible. It's really, really a possibility. So the Buddha said we need to understand something about self that frees us. One of the things we need to understand is, what is it that builds the self? The self is a construct. It's constructed. It's compounded. What is it that builds the sense of self? Grasping is one of the answers. When we push something away, when we hang on to something, when we're involved with something that thing is a big deal, then that builds a sense of self. If we're struggling, there's pain seems very intense in the body, or the mind seems very intense, or some situation, that thing has become a big deal, and resting on it being a big deal comes the sense of self. So the sense of self goes with grasping at something. To see that, the sense of self comes in proportion to how much we're struggling with something, how much we're grasping with something. To see that relationship. It comes also with measuring and comparing. How am I doing? How's my practice going? Am I working well enough? Am I this? Am I that? Am I attractive enough? Am I da-da-da-da-da? This constant measuring and comparing is maybe the favourite activity of the self. But it builds the self. The self is built on measuring and comparing. What happens when we, sometimes just being in the moment in a very natural way, without putting pressure on the moment, we let go of measuring and comparing, what happens to the sense of self? So to see these relationships, the relationship of grasping, measuring and comparing with the sense of self, to see it for ourselves. There's actually a mutual dependence. Self is built on measuring, grasping, comparing, and self builds, feeds, measuring, comparing, grasping. They're like that. They feed and support each other. When we see into self this way, really look, this is quite deep now, but when we begin to see, the sense of self is not something real or solid, it's completely dependent on this activity of measuring, of comparing, of grasping. It's not something real, independent. What begins to happen is we begin to recognize our non-separateness as part of that, our non-separateness with life. The self is not separate, not how it feels to be separate. That realization of non-separateness liberates love, just naturally, organically. It has to liberate love. So all this has everything to do with love. And because we're not so self-preoccupied, we're treating others equally. Their happiness is as important as my happiness, which is not the usual way of going about things. Usually we're concerned with me and maybe a small 1 or 2 or 3 people around me. What happens, the sense of that actually your well-being is as important as mine. And more than that, it actually, seeing through the self actually frees love from inhibition. So how often in life are we actually afraid, or we stop ourselves from expressing love, stop ourselves from making that connection because of some kind of fear, it's not me, or that's not the kind of person I am, or what will they think, will I be rejected? When we don't take self so solidly, so we're not so bound up in it, actually frees up love from inhibition. And to go through life binding our expression of love is really, well, it's a kind of tragedy. But even more than that, I feel that seeing through self in this way actually liberates self-expression. It frees a self-expression, because again, we're not concerned with what people will think, or will it be okay, will it measure up again. So the whole sense of creativity, of freedom to be able to say, do, create, artistic, whatever, is often bound by an over-exaggerated sense of self and the concern of what others think, etc. What would it be to have a sense of self that's free to express whatever is there? Free. Is not so preoccupied with its self-image. So what happens over the time in practice, and it may be that we don't actually have to wait that long, it's just something that we can begin to notice for ourselves in our practice, in our lives. What happens when we let go even a little bit of the agenda of self? Because self does have an agenda. You walk into a room, into a situation, something happens, even without being conscious of it. The question is, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? Is this going to be bad for me? Is it going to be good? Am I going to get something I want or something I don't want? That question is running through our lives like a thread that's every situation. And we get up in the morning and it's how will today be for me? We don't even realize the degree to which it's going on. What happens, a question, what happens to notice? What happens when that agenda if that way of looking, pushing away what we don't like, fearing what we don't like, trying to grab hold of, trying to get what we like, if that's let go of through practice, through spiritual practice, what begins to happen is the world begins to look different. Instead of looking at the world through me and my, actually the radiance and the mystery of things begins to reveal itself, because we're not putting this film over, and it's the radiance and the mystery of all things. And not just, I like this, I'll ignore everything else, I don't like that, that's what's important. All things begin to in a way shine, speak to us of something else. In a way, it's like the peace of all things begins to be revealed. Sometimes just a little bit, just get a sense of it, a moment of it. Or sometimes extremely deep, if you're really letting go of that agenda of self. And it's difficult sometimes. Our sense of life, our sense of aliveness, our sense of fulfillment and excitement is so bound up with the sense of self. So bound up with the sense of choosing for myself. It's almost like we can't imagine that letting go of that, letting go of the sense of self, letting go of the preoccupation, letting go of all this choice, would actually uncover something very fulfilling, very juicy, very beautiful. What is it that we need to understand about the self? That it's dependent on conditions. So it's not, as I said, that we're trying to get rid of the self, absorb it into something, dissolve it, etc. Sense of self comes and goes. It comes and goes. It gets. It might be there lightly. It might be there in a normal way. It might be there heavily. It might not be there at all. Sometimes it comes and goes. It goes through its cycles, dependent on conditions. Dependent on conditions. And it's not that we're trying to stay in one state. The coming and going of self, actually not a problem. Not a problem. You can see, there can be an understanding that self can be there in this way and that way, not there at all, in another way. It's all just the coming and going of the appearance of self. Not in any way a problem. We don't take self so seriously, we usually take self so seriously. We're beginning to take self much more lightly. And the more and more we take self lightly, the more and more we have freedom with this coming and going of self, the more and more we see through the so-called reality of self, then the more and more something else becomes apparent. Some other truth, in a way. The more that begins to shine through the life, because we're not obscuring it. And that light of truth begins to just shine more and more, and with it brings the deepest freedom, the deepest life. So we sit quietly for a couple of minutes.
Thank you for listening.